Women will not rest until we have what is rightfully ours, the full equality between the sexes that is known as feminism. We want and are entitled to enjoy the same rights, benefits and privileges that are accorded to men. As individuals and as our sex, it is our right. Our country will not thrive until we have equality. So that Women's Manifesto was penned earlier this month actually by Dr. Anne Summers, Order of Australia. So she has done some incredible work in our nation about representing women. And it was Jane actually who brought this to my attention. I think it's a great way to start our talk today. So we have 3 incredible women that we would love to probe and pick apart, and I'm really excited that you're all here to share it with me in the most gentle way. So I'm going to chat to them for 45 minutes. We're going to basically come what may. You know what women's conversations are like. So we did a pre-run last week and we went everywhere, but on the script. So I might be throwing this away, but please welcome to the stage Jane Joes, who I'll get you to come up. So Jane Jane as CEO of the Sydney Community Foundation and author of Places Women Make, which is my favourite book at the moment. I'm really loving reading it. So, and there's a chance to purchase that at the end of this insight as well at the front, and maybe get a author's signature or 2. Please welcome Mandy Gunsberg, who is the woman that Malcolm Turnbull turns to.
Yes, is that my nickname?
Yeah, you're much more than, you're not defined by relationships with men, we always say.
Thanks
but Mandy manages Babyology, and she founded it. It's 1.8 million parents, not just women. So she's definitely got the ear
97% women though.
Yeah, that's pretty well. And then finally Nicole Brown, Head of Women in Focus for CBA. So jump on the end for me. And we're lucky to have Nicole. She's just been at Farm World in Gippsland yesterday. So this is a change of events, I think, for you. So this is the pinnacle, I think, of our month-long celebration of all things women, and it's so great to see that apart from the cameramen, there's all women in here. We did have, I think 3 years ago we did this, and there was one man who sat right in the middle and asked all the questions. So I encourage you at the end to be ready with questions to ask these women, and I hope and pray that I do justice to the incredible talent that is up here on stage. But I'm going to start with the common link between all of us, which is the whole notion of community. So each of you run a community of influence, and Nicole, it was you that really signalled out that's what we do. So for you, what's the power of community?
I might just start by actually talking about Women in Focus community, because that to me sort of embodies what community is all about. We're a thriving community of women in business across Australia, and I think we all recognise in that community that women want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to relate to people who have either gone through an experience like theirs, or that they can learn from or seek inspiration from, and go, you know, she's done that too, or she's experienced that too, and I can learn from that. And I know Mandy through our community, and I also know Jane through the community. Yeah. So I think that's a really nice sort of link between all of us to start.
And then Jane, for you, Sydney Community Foundation, you're the CEO, you're literally the godmother of all of these female initiatives. So for you, what's the importance of community?
Well, I guess I first became really focused on community when I was 34, and I had small children, and community was local. It was the place that I lived. It was North Adelaide. And I decided to run for the City Council following some personal events in my life that, life is short, you get in, you make a contribution and you start now. And I guess what I learned is there is no one community, there are many communities. And then over a career of 30 years in urban planning and shaping the places where we live, I've been sort of led or found myself having taken time out to write my book about why we need women designing and shaping community. I found myself really attracted to the idea of running a philanthropic foundation for this city where communities are very divided, where wealth and poverty, the gap is growing. and where I could hopefully contribute to supporting the many communities to build the sense that they are one and that this city is a better place for it.
Absolutely. And now for you, Mandy, you're taking us into this brave new world of digital communities.
Yeah.
So talk to us about community.
Yeah, so I've been running babyology for a decade now. That makes me sound really old. But again, I launched that when I had
Not
my
as bad as
first...
30 years.
Not quite 30, but let's hope I'm not still doing this one 30 years on. But yeah, so it's been a decade, and I started as well when I had small kids. So I had a 1-year-old and was pregnant with the second one, and thought, great, time to start a business. Let's go do this. And yeah, it really started as a blog from the dining table. I saw an opening in the Australian market after moving back from the US and trying to work out what I wanted to do. As an over-researcher and a Virgo that I am, I do spreadsheets for everything.
Yeah.
So I had to research every brown cotton high chair in the world, put it into a pivot table, and just thought other parents might be interested in that information. And so that's how the website started, which they were interested. And so, yeah, we've really morphed and pivoted over the years. But, yeah, I'm proud to say we, have over 1.8 million women that come visit the website, and I feel like where the babyology vision has always been a very positive place to be. So, compared to a lot of big media publishers in Australia, we're not about traffic, we're not about clickbait. It's really about helping mums navigate through, and dads, but 97% women, navigate through that child rearing time from, when they're first pregnant till their kids are about 5 or 8 is when they normally drop off after they've had the second or third child. And it's really content that we feel helps them, supports them through our huge social media following of 1.3 million Facebook fans. We really, women between the age of 20 and 45, that's their place to go. That's where they're in the school pickup line. That's where they're waiting outside a ballet class. They're just checking that social all the time. They check, 6 to 8 times a day, the website. So we really try and just put positive, enforcing content on there to make them feel like they're doing a good job, because there's enough out there in the digital space that, is very judgmental towards mums.
So if we jump back to the idea of career and that career arc, so for you, Nicole, you've been involved in this banking industry for 7-8 years. You've been around the world with Commbank. You must have seen a whole lot of changes. What's it been like, that whole industry for you?
It's interesting. My career actually goes back further than that, and this will make me sound old too. I started, I'm from Perth, and I started in a professional services firm back in early 2000, and that was a very, very different place to what it is now. And, I was, I think, one of the only women in my whole division. We had a male who made very disparaging remarks about females as they walked past, very audibly. Wow. And it just, there was no role models, and it was actually quite an uncomfortable place to be. Not just a female, but someone who didn't fit that sort of stereotypical white male, role. But 18 odd years later, I think the landscape, certainly in the organisation I work for, has changed a lot. We value inclusivity, we value diversity, and that's not just gender, but it's all types of diversity.
And we've talked about research as well, that it demonstrates that diversity is so beneficial to business. So maybe we tease out, what is it that women do bring to business?
I think it's not just gender, but you're right. It's the whole piece around inclusion, I think. And to me, any difference of opinion or different experience or different outlook is really, really good. The research does show that when you have women, or actually diversity of any kind, decision-making capability improves, the types of ideas that you think about improves, and the workplace, or actually any part of society, is absolutely better for it.
Yeah. And Jane, something that I picked up reading your book to the wee hours of every morning was about cities were traditionally male places, because women actually weren't invited into the cities, they were in the homes. And it's almost, you were saying, from the 70s, we've sort of been reclaiming the cities as our domain earlier than that. So for you, what is it that women are bringing, not just to the environment of business, but actually to the physical environment?
Well, that's a huge question. I researched for 5 years to write a book.
Yes. So relax. Buy the book.
But I guess picking up similar threads to what Nicole, my first career, I was an ABC News journalist, and I decided to run for council to influence and shape communities. It was after a successful career there that I was approached to work with, and this is remembering I am a journalist, I write well. I was asked if I would join one of Australia's leading architectural multidisciplinary design companies to manage their office in Adelaide and to manage their business development strategy nationally. But like Nicole, it was a professional services firm, and any of you who've worked in them, you're paid at a high, you earn for the firm at a high billable rate by the hour, and you need to be doing those billables to matter. So what I was good at was listening and engaging communities, and I became, without being an urban planner nor an architect, I became a sort of key person in the middle 90s for talking to communities and governments and decision makers about the shaping of place. And that was when, I just got in there and did my part of it. Speed on, in 2006 to 2009, I worked with Bridget Smythe, the city architect at City of Sydney, on Clover Moore's 2030 strategy. And I guess by the time I've been doing that for 20 years, I realised that women have shaped cities, but they're not normally the architect of the building. It's not necessarily their name. They don't get the award or the recognition. And I think that is true in many fields for women. In my mentoring career over 15 years, one of the things that young high potential leaders in banks said, what do I do? It's my idea, and the guy above me says it, and it becomes his idea.
Yeah.
You've all experienced that.
And let's unpack that a little bit more specifically. So with Marianne Marnie Griffin, there's some great examples that you've given of people that have...
Well, she's fascinating. I mean, the book I began writing for my children who are in their 30s, for the millennials who are not going to grow up in one town, live in one house and work in one city. They're going to be like many of you. And the reason babyology, I'm sure, has its wonderful following is because so many women are having babies without the traditional support networks.
Yes.
They reach out
So,
online.
So in Places Women Make, I decided rather than to write a really anti-male, because I love men, I have a partner, I have sons, like Naomi, not quite as many.
Yeah.
She has 5 only. But what I wanted to do was say, look what women have done, and to tell positive stories. And as a way of saying and answering the question, will our cities be different in a present generation where more women will have the authorship of the design of the city, will design buildings, are influencing the places that we live in. And Marianne Marnie Griffin, well, the thing I loved about researching her, she was the wife of Walter Burley Griffin. She actually worked in Chicago at the time that the city was really the big idea in the 1920s. And she worked in Frank Lloyd Wright's office. He was a great womanizer, and really she did a lot of his work, but she didn't get the authorship of that work. Then for Walter Burley Griffin, it said she actually got the entry into the postbox on time, so they'd never have won it without what women often were have been to architects, is the sort of organiser to the great creative man. But it is now known that she was a theosophist, she was interested in feng shui, Canberra is designed with all of that. She is not recognised, I don't think, enough in Australia, really, for her role. And she's buried in a pauper's grave in Chicago, which seems very sad that is often the fate of women.
Yeah.
They're not recognised as much.
I love this quote. I've pulled 2 quotes from your book. It's almost the transition with women. Women played such roles as muse, accountant, wife, confidant and illustrator, or any combination of these. The woman supporting the man's career. And then later in the book, you've said, now women make things happen as catalysts, advocates, activists, commissioning clients, donors, influencers, philanthropists, decision makers, architects and urban planners. So I certainly think it's incredible trajectory, and I'd love to pick up on the idea of woman as entrepreneur, this whole
I might just add two
please.
tidbits to that though. So on philanthropy, 85% of women run non-for-profits because of their sense of community versus men. So they have that sense of belonging and wanting to give back and help, which is going back to Nicole's point on, you know, what women do differently in a workplace to men. And the other thing that we just researched yesterday at work, because we were writing articles about the cyclone, I thought it was fascinating that cyclones until very recently were all named
women.
after women.
Yes. And it's interesting that you were saying that, Jane, that there aren't many women that are really acknowledged. And I think if you look at, it's almost Freudian, the men are designing these buildings, but you say that women take the places in between because they are the places of community and connection.
Well, I don't want to be boring with statistics, but when I was writing, I wrote this over a number of years, my friends who are doctors said, oh, this is ridiculous, Jane, you know, doctors in medicine, in dentistry, in law, you know, women are equally at the top of the profession. The High Court judge in Australia is a woman. And I would say, but they're not in architecture.
Yeah, it's true.
And they're really not. America is different. It has Julia Morgan, it has a number of really famous women architects. But with landscape architecture, which is the design of the spaces between the buildings and parks like Harmony Park across from this building, women are about 50%, whereas in architecture in Australia, only 20% of registered architects are women, and probably only 2%, you know, are really authors, designers of public places. Yeah. It's rare.
And you're saying, you reference Zaha Hadid, Zaha Hadid.
Well, it was interesting. Yes, she died just after the book came out. She died in February last year, having at least lived to get the Pritzker Prize. But I was in Venice last year, and there was a retrospective of her work as part of the Architecture Biennale. She was an extraordinary designer, and yet in Britain it took her 18 years to get a building built because the male architecture establishment couldn't really deal with her. She was too strong and too big.
It's because you also mentioned Rachel Neeson, Hannah Tribe, Kirsten Thompson, but also there's a lot of female partnerships. So Marion and Walter Burley Griffin and Glenn Murcutt. So maybe I jump to Nicole.
Well, Glenn and Wendy
exactly.
And Harry Seidler and Penelope, who was an architect and kind of drove his myth in a way, like Jackie Kennedy did for JFK. Penelope has kept Harry Seidler's myth really there.
And I think that's when we all met together last week, it was almost, we wanted to suss out where each of us were, perhaps on the feminist spectrum, if we can call it that. And we all instantly said, like, for us, the men are a really important part of this new movement. And Nicole, maybe you speak to that, just the importance of men. You work with a lot of women, but the importance of men as mentors and champions and supporters.
Absolutely. And I think that extends everything from partners, if you have a male partner in the home, to male champions and supporters and advocates and things in the workplace, to males championing gender equality and indeed all kinds of equality out in society. It's interesting, I had a conversation with one of my colleagues in the week about, some of you might have heard of the panel pledge. Let me tell you. A lot of, it was a couple of years ago, a few males who were on the sort of speaking circuit recognised that when they came to do panel discussions at conferences and things like that, too often there was a panel full of men and only men. So these gents got together and formed what they called the panel pledge, which basically said that they will pledge to only sit on panels where there's a good representation of females. And we were talking about that at work and saying, you know, that's something that the males actually champion because they almost had the
It kind of makes me wild that you need the panel pledge in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And this was at
And that
female
we actually
conferences
even
as
feel
well.
good about the men, Nicole. I don't feel good about them, actually.
But I actually did feel, I felt good that they recognised they were in a position to do something about it, and they did.
So let's talk about men then. There's websites. There's websites like the Good Man Project, and there's sites that are encouraging this new look man, and it's interesting for us. You know, it's almost a care versus career continuum. A friend was recounting a story. She's a professor at Sydney Uni, and they had this panel of all women, incredibly accomplished STEM women in technology and science. At the end of the panel, they were expecting all these questions about technology, and every question was about how did you fit in children and care? How did you marry well? How did you know, as in a man that supports you? So I don't know who wants to jump in and tackle that one. Where do men sit in this? And
Jump in if you want.
Yeah.
So for instance, you know, it's definitely changed, and over the decade that I've been working with parents and women, you know, in the digital space, it's never been easier to be able to work from home, have flexible hours, do all that type of thing while you're raising your children. I put hands up if people are doing that whole juggle with kids and working and all that at the moment. Also,
never stop.
Few of you, exactly. It doesn't stop when they get older, does it? But yeah, and it's never been easier. It used to be much harder. Like I know, growing up, my mum had to be in an office from 9 till 4, 5 days a week because that's just what you did. She was a legal secretary, whereas I was lucky enough for the first 9 years of my business raising my 3 girls. The youngest is now 4, where I was at home working from the dining room table. So you just navigate and juggle. But I mean, a man and a partner makes a huge amount of difference. And I've got staff at the moment, even at work, where they've had a little baby, they earn more money than he does. He stays home and he's the primary caregiver. And I think those lines are definitely more blurry than they were 20 years ago. You know, men used to fix everything around the house, do the finances, put out the garbage, while women did the grocery shopping and the cooking. Whereas now I think, you know, in every household that I know anyway, you work out, you know, you both do everything. Fridays is my day with my 4-year-old, so hubby's taken her to music class today because I'm here, and that's just the way our life works, and I'm sure that's the way, you know, a lot of people's lives work. You just kind of navigate around that, and they're a lot more involved than maybe they were when your dads were growing up and around you. You know, a lot of dads just used to come home, eat dinner, and that was it, rather than actually be involved in the household.
And yet the reality, if you look at statistics, Melinda Gates did an open letter last year, and it was about the volume of unpaid work that women do in the home, and pretty much on average it's 50% more, but up to 6 times more in developing countries. So there is a shift, but women are trying to do it all, and I've got a stack of these books that I've been reading all this month. So it's Ariana Huffington tells us to thrive, Sheryl Sandberg tells us to lean in and put our hand up and, you know, take our place at the table. And then other people, I really love the Unfinished Business by Anne-Marie Slaughter, and it's about that care versus career. But are we wanting to have our cake and eat it too? We're grabbing for things, but we're sort of not letting go of what else we're doing. Who wants to tackle that one?
I think I said when we had a pre-conversation about this, I think women, if they want to, they can have it all. They can have a partner, a husband, a wife, whatever. They can have children. They can have a career. But it's really hard to have all of those things simultaneously at a particularly high level. And I think that is the challenge for women, and the flexibility that, you know, I know Commbank really promotes flexible working hours, and the architectural practices, the law firms, you can be a partner of a law firm and work 3 days a week. Those things are great, and I was asked recently by a male partner of an architectural practice, should we extend flex to men? And I said, of course, because they parent too, and it's for the man and the woman, often two architects in different practices, to work out who's going to be the really hero guy for a period and when. So I think we can have it all. It's just very difficult sustaining all three at once. And particularly, it interests me, you know, there's still such a bias about this. You'll all remember when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister that there was derailing because she didn't have children. Well, could she have done that? I was once offered a federal seat. I lived in Adelaide and had a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I was told it would be 256 nights a year in Canberra. And I had overnight to decide. I would have been a federal politician, I would have won the seat. I said no, because my priority was my sons. It is really hard. Julie Bishop, who's been a fabulous foreign minister, has no children, has had very difficult relationships with men, one marriage and about 5 failed relationships, and now is happily, I know her, she's from Adelaide. You know, these having it all at once is really hard.
And it's interesting that there's often a lot of prejudice, and I know, you know, kind of opinions about it might almost be coming from within the sisterhood. Mandy with Babyology in 2013, he took a stand against mama trolls because there was a lot of hate about how people were
Shocking.
parenting. Yeah,
No,
It's shocking.
And it's not, and that we're not getting any closer to that not being an issue. I have
Yeah.
to say, women and mums in particular are incredibly judgmental towards
Yeah.
each other. You know, they do judge if you're a stay-at-home mum, if you're a working mum, if you know if
Yes.
you're not involved in school or daycare,
Yeah.
you are. Like, you can never really win.
Yeah.
But you know, the list goes on: bottle versus breast, co-sleeping. You know, you name it. There'll be mums out there who will be harassing
So
you.
if I could, so your compass has to be you.
Yes.
It's for
Yeah.
you to decide how your kids are going, how your marriage is going,
Yeah.
how your career is going, and at what point you want to fast forward on one of those.
And as you
in a
say,
way.
you can. Well, I think you can have it all, but it's very hard to feel happy when you're trying to do it all. It's that constant guilt and juggle of your relationship, your kids, working. You know, you're not at work enough, but then you're not with the kids enough. If you go to a school assembly or something, then you have to work late at night. If you
Yeah.
travel, you miss a school
Yeah.
assembly. You know, it's this constant daily Tetris. I have a stand-up meeting with my husband every morning so that we make sure the Tetris
Yeah,
diary.
I still do a diary dance
You
with
just
everybody.
have to. We make sure all kids are accounted for, and that all our work meetings are accounted for, and there are no gaps in the day. But yeah, you know, it's hard, and I think, you know, a lot of women are trying to do that the really hard way. You know, generation before us, our mums, I don't think were doing that. They had their jobs, and then they had their kids, and they weren't working the, you know, hours that we're all working in the digital world. So it has its benefits, but the negatives is you are always on, and if you leave work early, bosses expect you to be on at night. You know, a lot of women are in jobs and want to be defined by their work outside the house. That's more than ever. We survey our community every year, and we did our last one, and more than ever it came across that women don't want to be known as grocery buyers and mums. They're happy to be mums, but they want to be a lot more than that. But it's finding the flexibility, the part-time, the work from home that allows them to raise children and work at the same time.
And
if
I might add something, and I
do.
think the other thing that's coming is, as parents age, the caring for those
Yes.
parents is often falls on women more than men, you know, the daughters perhaps rather than the sons. So, you know, I think that's something that's going to become increasingly, you know, something that we need to be thinking about as well. So it's the, you know, the younger generation and caring for the older generation as well.
Well, it's how family's defined, really. And if I can thread this back in to feminism, feminism's not a women's issue, it's a men's and women's issue, because it's fundamentally about sort of equality and everybody being recognised for their humanity. And, you know, lots of the terms that we talk about parenting, and we think of a man and a woman, and we talk about looking after family, and we think of kids. But actually, family might even be a group of friends or someone who's very sick and very dear to you.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in an ideal world, you would see flexibility beginning to work for men and women and individuals.
And I'm glad you took us there, Nicole, because that was my point as well, that there was a Harvard study that Harvard Business School, they looked at all the qualities of women in nursing and traditional caring professions. And then, again, that was pretty much women were involved in that. But then they looked at top leadership, and they found that it was actually the caregivers that were really successful at that top level. And often it doesn't have to be caring necessarily for family, caring for an idea, caring for a community, caring for ideals. So perhaps if you speak to that, Nicole, what the responsibility is for you as a woman that is a mentor, I guess, to 16,000 women out there, and what you get from your team as well.
Sure. And I'd probably take off the role of women in that. I think as a leader or as a mentor or as a support of any kind, I look back on the people who have helped shape me. I haven't sort of thought about them as males or females. I recall somebody at work actually calling me up probably about 3 or 4 years ago when I was still over in Perth, and he said, "Oh, we've got a role going in Sydney. I noticed you haven't applied." I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "Well, I think you should." Oh, that's really interesting. So without that call, I would never have applied. And support can be something as really as simple as that to much more significant things like supporting team if they do need to take time to care for people, or if they've got illness or anything like that. I think it's a really broad spectrum of what we mean by support and mentoring and sponsorship.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask you, Jane, this is my last question before I throw it open to you ladies, but we often, I think feminism has been accused of being a plutocratic issue. It's a white woman's, affluent quandary, it's the glass ceiling, but the reality is there's the sticky floor where there's women that are in poverty, working multiple jobs, and they can't reach for that corner office. So for you, with your work with the foundation, particularly in the Sydney Women's Fund, how do you see gender versus wealth inequality?
I think, as I said, feminism is a human rights issue. And working in Sydney Community Foundation, where we, through Sydney Women's Fund, our biggest and most beautiful and active fund, which CVA supports Women in Focus, we have 4 reasons for giving. How we are trying to help disadvantaged women, or women who, for whatever reason in their life, are faced with barriers from being their best self. We aim to give women a sense of belonging, a pathway to work, really, through education, because work means financial security, money in a room of your own. We want to help them transform the places where they live, and we want the women that we support to feel independent and safe. Now, they're all things that all of us want. It's kind of a manifesto. It's sort of why we're here today. All of you want to feel you're belonging, feel you're making a difference, feel you're building financial and other independence. Amongst the very disadvantaged women in the community, for them it's just so much harder. Therein lies the difference. It's harder because when we try and measure the impact of our giving, what we get over and over as feedback is this one beautiful word, confidence. I feel more confident after people have been given supported education, TAFE training to get back into work. And I think we are all very lucky we're educated women in this room, and education is the key to everybody being able to sort of find their gift and use that gift for purpose. So I guess that's what I've learned, that they're no different. The women who've not been educated, not had that opportunity, not been independent, not had a voice, they're no different, and you'd have a lot of them coming to you.
And Mandy, for your daughters, what do you want their future to look like?
Oh, I think, it's about just they've got the whole world in front of them. I think it's fantastic that, the current generation of kids are getting involved a lot more than we were allowed to be involved, I suppose, at this age. I was very proud. I took my 11-year-old last week to a huge event at Barangaroo with, 60 women entrepreneurs in the room, the biggest and the best CEOs in Australia talking to her, and she just found that fascinating.
She was involved in it.
She was involved in it. She was a timekeeper, but it was all about the dessert trolley for her. That's her parting words. But just being in that world is amazing.
Works.
I was never open I was given a university syllabus, which is already more than a lot of people, and said, go pick a career. But really, I'm raising 3 daughters. They can see the juggle that I do. The older 2 definitely understand that and understand the pros and cons of, me being there and me not being there and trying to work through that as they're growing up. The little one, not quite so much. But I think it's great that, the girls are exposed to that now. And also, I know a lot of friends with boys, it's all about raising boys a certain way to allow. So it's not just about how we treat our girls as they're growing up, it's how we raise our boys to be men who accept women who might be in, amazing jobs and leaders and, not
and
be...
treat women well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So just to close, I'm going to say my favourite female quote, and it'll get you girls to think you haven't been prepared for this, but just a role model for you or someone that's encouraged you or has been really, instrumental. But for me, it was Anne Sherry, who said, she was the head of Westpac Bank, I believe it was, and she said, women can be charming and change the world. And I really love that our feminine strengths are things that we need to actually embrace rather than trying to beat men at their game. So I think that for me was good. Nicole, have you got one in mind?
I'll tell a story instead of a quote. And that's my dear old Nana, who's long since passed, but she was my dad's mum and she raised 7 children. And back then, feminism certainly wasn't a word that she would have ever sort of come across. But I look at how the values and things that she instilled, particularly in my dad, and then that's translated to how he brought my sister and I up. And I just look back at her and think, what an incredible, truly incredible woman. And growing up in a time that must have been very, very difficult too. Certainly not... as Jane said, we are privileged, and I believe we are. She didn't have the education, she didn't have the financial means that a lot of us here have today, but how she brought up her family is incredible.
And it fits, Jane, with quotes that you have in your book about women take the long-term view, and it's the small things that stir our blood, not those big things. So for you, who's your...
Yeah. When I have a quote at the beginning of every chapter, as you know, of things that... ideas that I think are really worth considering. But I'm going to choose one that was Erica Jong, who wrote Fear of Flying, which was a book that really put feminism on the map. And it's simple. Everyone has talent. What's rare is the courage to follow it to the dark places it leads. Because it's actually never easy being the best you can be. It's always hard. And you're never really satisfied.
I'm going to go more story as well, just a quick one. But yeah, so my most influential person probably through the work career, not personal, but I met someone called Jane Huxley, some of you might know, who was just left as CEO of Pandora, and before that she was Fairfax, and she made a huge difference in a lot of women's lives. When she arrived in Fairfax, she's still got 2 little girls. Her girls are only maybe 10 and 12 now, but 4-day weeks, women could work from home, flexibility in a huge organisation that would normally not allow that. And so I met her in the early days. I'll never forget this. It's all about those moments when you meet people. Went to a cake baking class. I think I'd had a baby allergy for about 6 months, and I was there in the room going, oh my God, I'm amazing. I've got this business and we get 200 visits a day, and I had no idea what she did for work. But then at the end of the day, she gave me a card, and I'm the CEO of Fairfax, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. But ever since that was like maybe 9 years ago, she's been one of my biggest fans and supporters through my journey. We have a very informal mentorship going where I can just call her and cry and say, like, let's go for a coffee, and I'm meeting her next week. That's just what you need. A lot of these informal people you can reach out to and go, am I doing the right thing? What do I need to do? She was, at that point they were a competitor of ours, but she was amazing. It didn't blink an eyelid on helping someone she didn't know, coming into a new market without a lot of experience, and to this day I can just call her up and watch her career as it goes from strength to strength. So it's women like that out there who just give of themselves, and it makes such a difference to other people's lives.
I think that's a perfect punctuation point, because if I think about the women here, you've all got your little communities of influence, and it's about helping other women but also looking to others. So I think that whole community is what we have here and what you go out into the world. So who has some questions?
I'd like to suggest, because I've done the work kids thing for years now. It's really hard, and it's really hard to find the balance. I do agree with you that the balance is quite a myth, you know. Women
And it's your balance.
Pardon?
It's your balance.
Well, it's your
not
balance, you know. You look at
mine,
other
it's
people,
not
and they're being
yours.
healthy, and they go in the gym 3 times a week, and their kids are dressed well, and, you know, all this stuff, and you try and just go, why can't I do that, you know? And I always like to think, oh, that mum that's sitting in a cafe with her 3 kids that looks perfect at 8 o'clock, you know, someone's about to spill a drink and it's all going to be over. But yeah, I think it's about working from home as well, having that off time. Like, I struggled with that for years and years, because it's great having a flexible job, and, you know, I know Ursula at Legal Vision, and, you know, allowing that, but then very often women get sucked into putting the kids to bed and being online from 7 till 11 at night, which is really your you time, and it's very hard to just close the laptop, not sit and watch TV while scrolling through Facebook, and Facebook leads to a link about work, and, you know, and it's endless. So it's really about having that off time where you go, I'm going to watch my favourite crappy TV show now, and I'm actually not going to have a laptop on my lap, because that's the only way. Otherwise you just get sucked in 24/7 the whole time.
But also it is a period of your life.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, you know, your children
Grow up.
do become teenagers, you know, and when I was mentoring at Citibank, actually, I remember a conversation with CEO Steve Roberts saying, you have to accept that women's careers will plateau for a period when they're doing that real juggle. But they can go on till they're 65. You know, you don't have to do it all at once.
One word that hasn't been used, but we've been talking about, I think, is boundaries. So, you know, setting them. I know a previous boss of mine said to me, you know, he was a very senior chap in the bank, said, you will never, ever get an email from me on the weekend. I will be in here at 7 and I will probably log off at 8 o'clock at night, but you will never get an email from me on the weekend. And he stuck to that because that's the boundaries that worked for him. Now, other people actually might go, you know what, I do an hour on the weekend because that's how I manage my work. But then they log off at 5 or what have you. So I think you need to find the boundaries that work for you.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I wouldn't send email, I don't contact staff. If staff aren't working, because I have part-time staff, I don't email them. I just have to be disciplined enough to remember that thing and do it, because I think it's a really thin end of the wedge. It's different if you're Mandy and you've got your own business. When you're working for yourself...
No, but even then, I think it's about the culture you set up. We've got 20-odd staff, and I might email on a weekend or at 11 o'clock at night just because that's when I have time to do that. But I make it very clear that by no means do I expect them to respond to me at 11 o'clock at night. You know, that I want everyone, I don't want people to burn themselves out. You know, you do your own timing, but just because that might be the way I work more effectively, you know, it doesn't mean that that's the way everyone in the organisation
And you've
needs
got to be careful. When I was writing, I'm actually a night person, and I wrote a lot at night, and I used to get emails back, what are you doing up at 2:15? You know?
The house is quiet at 2:15.
It's better
So
not
another
to.
book, if I can recommend this one that I don't have any shares in or sales, but Unfinished Business is excellent. I have gone through, it's all about career, and they call it Care and Competition. It's a really, really good book. So for me, it's Unfinished Business by Anne-Marie Slaughter. So she's the one that wrote Women Can't Have It All, and it broke the internet a couple of years ago.
Yeah. She's a New Yorker?
She worked for Hillary Clinton and incredibly successful, and it was all about her, the balance between work and a lot of what you've said, and it's excellent. For me, it's sort of the ultimate. Up in the back.
Bravo.
Yeah. And I might just say on that as well, you know, women at that age, you know, at 45 or between 45 and 65, many of them have had children, and women who are mothers, I have to say, not that women who aren't mothers aren't, but women who are mothers are incredibly hardworking women because they've done that school, daycare, pick up, drop off. They have to get a full day's worth in maybe a 6-hour period. So, you know, women that we have on our team, you know, they work so hard in those hours because they know it's gold to be able to have a job that you can leave at 4 o'clock to go and pick up from daycare or
and my team's
whatever.
the same.
Exactly. So throughout their working career, then they've done that and they understand what it's like to work really hard in the hours they're given. And I do agree, I don't think we're paid for what we do compared to men who often can maybe take longer lunches or have more breaks, or women don't do a lot of that stuff often because they've been used to being on a clock the whole time to get home to children. So,
But see, I really agree. It's so important for women to have women who are in the entrepreneurial or part-time working space, not of course in the large organisations to have a really clear role, a clear position description, clear outcomes. And I don't really mean KPIs, I actually mean what's expected and a salary. And I've been, women are not always good at arguing for their worth.
And
It's a challenge.
just following Mandy, there's a quote that an early childhood a caregiver needs the analytical skills of a physicist, the adaptive abilities of a crisis manager, emotional insight of a psychologist, and general range of knowledge of a Jeopardy champion. So there's a lot going on. I'll take one more question.
I guess I'm old enough to feel annoyed that we have to talk about diversity but we do, unfortunately. It's very often, we've all got, I imagine, middle-class Australian backgrounds, and that is not the picture of this society. In Western Sydney, 80% of the population have a background which is not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, it's Southeast Asian or Indigenous or Islander. This is a very diverse city, and look, despite all the will in the world, I don't think, that's why it enrages me that you still have to talk about putting women on a panel when they're 50% of the community. But in fact, people of diverse background are probably 50% of the community. And you're right to raise it.